At Prairie View A&M University, we've been igniting passion in students for more than 140 years. It's about inspiration. It's about global influence. It's about self-expression and individuality. It's about trailblazing a path of excellence. It's about engaging in the greater community. Above all, it's about helping you realize your dreams. Ignite your passion. Experience Prairie View A&M University.
The Prairie View A&M Naval ROTC program was established in March of 1968. So at that time, during the Vietnam War, it was compulsory to be involved in a military program. So Dr. A.I. Thomas, the president of the university, was interested in establishing a Naval ROTC unit to complement the Army ROTC unit that was already on campus. Interestingly, at the same time, the Navy was interested in expanding the diversity of the Navy and Marine Corps, and particularly the officer corps. And so it was a natural fit, and Prairie View A&M in March of 1968 became the very first Naval ROTC unit established at a historically black college or university here at Prairie View A&M.
Prairie View A&M University has always been somewhat of at the point on the frontiers of change. And the Naval ROTC program was again one of those programs that was implemented to keep us out on the point. They knew that they being Dr. Avenai Thomas and others knew that the Navy was a front runner and it was pretty much an elite operation. And by allowing students from Prairie View to become a part of that would make us world-class leaders. And so the program was designed to take country boys like myself and expose them to a different world, a different set of values and rules and regulations. And we adapted. It changed. It was a game changer for us.
Me personally, I can honestly say that I wouldn't be here without this program. I'm from a small country town in Arkansas with about 10,000 people. This gave me an opportunity to get outside of my comfort zone. Being 40 minutes from Houston, I never thought I would see myself here. I always knew that I would be on a college campus somewhere, but I never thought or even dreamed that I would be in the United States military, particularly the Naval Service. This has given me a platform to be able to reach back and be a provider amongst my family. I also got to travel and see tons of the world, which is something that a lot of people, they really enjoy.
My job as a professor of naval science is to develop young men and women mentally, morally, and physically as they get ready to commission into the United States Navy and the United States Navy. Here at Prairie View, what makes it special is our midshipmen. And so you think about a unit that now is 50 years old, that has produced over 400 young officers into the Navy and Marine Corps, and to date 3 flag officers, which is a remarkable accomplishment. So Vice Admiral David Brewer III, Rear Admiral Kelvin Dixon, and Rear Admiral O.C. Combs Jr. Tremendous accomplishment to have 3 flag officers from a unit that early.
So what makes this program unique is that we are the first HBCU to establish an ROTC. And with that, I feel that we have a lot of shoes to fill. With those 3 flag officers, I feel that there could be more. And with our diversity growing, I think that we can accomplish that.
It helped to mold officers and we used to say gentlemen, but gentle women and officers. It helped to mold us. It gave us, again, skills that we didn't really know about.
The product that Prairie View has been able to generate over the past few years since I've graduated and even before then has completely changed the dynamic of what we're producing for the fleet. Whenever you go somewhere now, your first ship, like myself, when I reported on board the USS Vandergrift, my weapons officer was a Prairie View graduate. So it's pretty nice to know that they're turning out products that are actually staying in to pursue their military career.
And I've met so many amazing people that want the same goal as me, and with that I feel it just makes me want to be better as a person and hopefully bring that out of the Navy later in the future.
And I can't say what the next 50 years will hold when you think about modern warfare or what will be needed from a military service, but I do know that if we remain committed to ensuring that our midshipmen are able to think critically, to function as a team, to build individual resilience, to take the enormous amount of data that's available to them today and be able to sort through to get to what matters, to be able to problem solve in a complex and ambiguous world, that our Navy and Marine Corps is going to be in great shape over the next 50 years and beyond.
At Prairie View A&M University, we've been igniting passion in students for more than 140 years. It's about inspiration. It's about global influence. It's about self-expression and individuality. It's about trailblazing a path of excellence. It's about engaging in the greater community. Above all, it's about helping you realize your dreams. Ignite your passion. Experience Prairie View A&M University.
The Prairie View A&M Naval ROTC program was established in March of 1968. So at that time, during the Vietnam War, it was compulsory to be involved in a military program. So Dr. A.I. Thomas, the president of the university, was interested in establishing a Naval ROTC unit to complement the Army ROTC unit that was already on campus. Interestingly, at the same time, the Navy was interested in expanding the diversity of the Navy and Marine Corps, and particularly the Officer Corps. And so it was a natural fit, and Prairie View A&M in March of 1968 became the very first Naval ROTC unit established at a historically black college or university here at Prairie View A&M.
Prairie View A&M University has always been somewhat of at the point on the frontiers of change. And the Naval ROTC program was again one of those programs that was implemented to keep us out on the point. They knew that they being Dr. Avenai Thomas and others knew that the Navy was a front runner and was pretty much an elite operation. And by allowing students from Prairie View to become a part of that would make us world-class leaders. And so the program was designed to take country boys like myself and expose them to a different world, a different set of values and rules and regulations. And we adapted. It changed. It was a game changer for us.
Me personally, I can honestly say that I wouldn't be here without this program. I'm from a small country town in Arkansas with about 10,000 people. This gave me an opportunity to get outside of my comfort zone, being 40 minutes from Houston. I never thought I would see myself here. I always knew that I would be on a college campus somewhere, but I never thought or even dreamed that I would be in the United States military, particularly the Naval Service. This has given me a platform to be able to reach back and be a provider amongst my family. I also got to travel and see tons of the world, which is something that a lot of people, they really enjoy.
My job as a professor of naval science is to develop young men and women mentally, morally, and physically as they get ready to commission into the United States Navy and the United States Navy. Here at Prairie View, what makes it special is our midshipmen. And so you think about a unit that now is 50 years old, that has produced over 400 young officers in the Navy and Marine Corps, and to date 3 flag officers, which is a remarkable accomplishment. So Vice Admiral David Brewer III, Rear Admiral Kelvin Dixon, and Rear Admiral O.C. Combs Jr. Tremendous accomplishment to have 3 flag officers from a unit that early.
So what makes this program unique is that we are the first HBCU to establish an ROTC. And with that, I feel that we have a lot of shoes to fill. With those 3 flag officers, I feel that there could be more. And with our diversity growing, I think that we can accomplish that.
It helped to mold officers and we used to say gentlemen, but gentle women and officers. It helped to mold us. It gave us, again, skills that we didn't really know about.
The product that Prairie View has been able to generate over the past few years since I've graduated and even before then has completely changed the dynamic of what we're producing for the fleet. Whenever you go somewhere now, your first ship, like myself when I reported on board the USS Vandergrift, my weapons officer was a Prairie View graduate. So it's pretty nice to know that they're turning out products that are actually staying in to pursue their military career.
And I've met so many amazing people that want the same goal as me, and with that I feel it just makes me want to be better as a person and hopefully bring that out of the Navy later in the future.
And I can't say what the next 50 years will hold when you think about modern warfare or what will be needed from a military service. But I do know that if we remain committed to ensuring that our midshipmen are able to think critically, to function as a team, to build individual resilience, to take the enormous amount of data that's available to them today and be able to sort through to get to what matters, to be able to problem solve in a complex and ambiguous world, that our Navy and Marine Corps is going to be in great shape over the next 50 years and beyond.
At Prairie View A&M University, we've been igniting passion in students for more than 140 years. It's about inspiration. It's about global influence. It's about self-expression and individuality. It's about trailblazing a path of excellence. It's about engaging in the greater community. Above all, it's about helping you realize your dreams. Ignite your passion. Experience Prairie View A&M University.
The Prairie View A&M Naval ROTC program was established in March of 1968. So at that time, during the Vietnam War, it was compulsory to be involved in a military program. So Dr. A.I. Thomas, the president of the university, was interested in establishing a Naval ROTC unit to complement the Army ROTC unit that was already on campus. Interestingly, at the same time, the Navy was interested in expanding the diversity of the Navy and Marine Corps, and particularly the Officer Corps. And so it was a natural fit, and Prairie View A&M in March of 1968 became the very first Naval ROTC unit established at a historically black college or university here at Prairie View A&M.
Prairie View A&M University has always been somewhat of at the point on the frontiers of change. And the Naval ROTC program was again one of those programs that was implemented to keep us out on the point. They knew that they being Dr. Avenai Thomas and others knew that the Navy was a front runner and it was pretty much an elite operation. And by allowing students from Prairie View to become a part of that would make us world-class leaders. And so the program was designed to take country boys like myself and expose them to a different world, a different set of values and rules and regulations. And we adapted. It changed. It was a game changer for us.
Me personally, I can honestly say that I wouldn't be here without this program. I'm from a small country town in Arkansas with about 10,000 people. This gave me an opportunity to get outside of my comfort zone, being 40 minutes from Houston. I never thought I would see myself here. I always knew that I would be on a college campus somewhere, but I never thought or even dreamed that I would be in the United States military, particularly the Naval Service. This has given me a platform to be able to reach back and be a provider amongst my family. I also got to travel and see tons of the world, which is something that a lot of people, they really enjoy.
My job as a professor of naval science is to develop young men and women mentally, morally, and physically as they get ready to commission into the United States Navy and the United States Navy. Here at Prairie View, what makes it special is our midshipmen. And so you think about a unit that now is 50 years old, that has produced over 400 young officers in the Navy and Marine Corps, and to date 3 flag officers, which is a remarkable accomplishment. So Vice Admiral David Brewer III, Rear Admiral Kelvin Dixon, and Rear Admiral O.C. Combs Jr. Tremendous accomplishment to have 3 flag officers from a unit that early.
So what makes this program unique is that we are the first HBCU to establish an ROTC. And with that, I feel that we have a lot of shoes to fill. With those 3 flag officers, I feel that there could be more. And with our diversity growing, I think that we can accomplish that.
It helped to mold officers and we used to say gentlemen, but gentle women and officers. It helped to mold us. It gave us, again, skills that we didn't really know about.
The product that Prairie View has been able to generate over the past few years since I've graduated and even before then has completely changed the dynamic of what we're producing for the fleet. Whenever you go somewhere now, your first ship, like myself, when I reported on board the USS Vandergrift, my weapons officer was a Prairie View graduate. So it's pretty nice to know that they're turning out products that are actually staying in to pursue their military career.
And I've met so many amazing people that want the same goal as me, and with that I feel it just makes me want to be better as a person and hopefully bring that out of the Navy later in the future.
And I can't say what the next 50 years will hold when you think about modern warfare or what will be needed from a military service. But I do know that if we remain committed to ensuring that our midshipmen are able to think critically, to function as a team, to build individual resilience, to take the enormous amount of data that's available to them today and be able to sort through to get to what matters, to be able to problem solve in a complex and ambiguous world, that our Navy and Marine Corps is going to be in great shape over the next 50 years and beyond.
At Prairie View A&M University, we've been igniting passion in students for more than 140 years. It's about inspiration. It's about global influence. It's about self-expression and individuality. It's about trailblazing a path of excellence. It's about engaging in the greater community. Above all, it's about helping you realize your dreams. Ignite your passion. Experience Prairie View A&M University.
The Prairie View A&M Naval ROTC program was established in March of 1968. So at that time, during the Vietnam War, it was compulsory to be involved in a military program. So Dr. A.I. Thomas, the president of the university, was interested in establishing a Naval ROTC unit to complement the Army ROTC unit that was already on campus. Interestingly, at the same time, the Navy was interested in expanding the diversity of the Navy and Marine Corps, and particularly the Officer Corps. And so it was a natural fit, and Prairie View A&M in March of 1968 became the very first Naval ROTC unit established at a historically black college or university here at Prairie View A&M.
Prairie View A&M University has always been somewhat of at the point on the frontiers of change. And the Naval ROTC program was again one of those programs that was implemented to keep us out on the point. They knew that they being Dr. Avenai Thomas and others knew that the Navy was a front runner and it was pretty much an elite operation. And by allowing students from Prairie View to become a part of that would make us world-class leaders. And so the program was designed to take country boys like myself and expose them to a different world, a different set of values and rules and regulations. And we adapted. It changed. It was a game changer for us.
Me personally, I can honestly say that I wouldn't be here without this program. I'm from a small country town in Arkansas with about 10,000 people. This gave me an opportunity to get outside of my comfort zone, being 40 minutes from Houston. I never thought I would see myself here. I always knew that I would be on a college campus somewhere, but I never thought or even dreamed that I would be in the United States military, particularly the Naval Service. This has given me a platform to be able to reach back and be a provider amongst my family. I also got to travel and see tons of the world, which is something that a lot of people, they really enjoy.
My job as a professor of naval science is to develop young men and women mentally, morally, and physically as they get ready to commission into the United States Navy and the United States Navy. Here at Prairie View, what makes it special is our midshipmen. And so you think about a unit that now is 50 years old, that has produced over 400 young officers into the Navy and Marine Corps, and to date 3 flag officers, which is a remarkable accomplishment. So Vice Admiral David Brewer III, Rear Admiral Kelvin Dixon, and Rear Admiral O.C. Combs Jr. tremendous accomplishment to have 3 flag officers from a unit that early.
So what makes this program unique is that we are the first HBCU to establish an ROTC. And with that, I feel that we have a lot of shoes to fill. With those 3 flag officers, I feel that there could be more. And with our diversity growing, I think that we can accomplish that.
It helped to mold officers and we used to say gentlemen, but gentlewomen and officers. It helped to mold us. It gave us, again, skills that we didn't really know about.
The product that Prairie View has been able to generate over the past few years since I've graduated and even before then has completely changed the dynamic of what we're producing for the fleet. Whenever you go somewhere now, your first ship, like myself, when I reported on board the USS Vandergrift, my weapons officer was a Prairie View graduate. So it's pretty nice to know that they're turning out products that are actually staying in to pursue their military career.
And I've met so many amazing people that want the same goal as me, and with that I feel it just makes me want to be better as a person and hopefully bring that out of the Navy later in the future.
And I can't say what the next 50 years will hold when you think about modern warfare or what will be needed from a military service. But I do know that if we remain committed to ensuring that our midshipmen are able to think critically, to function as a team, to build individual resilience, to take the enormous amount of data that's available to them today and be able to sort through to get to what matters, to be able to problem solve in a complex and ambiguous world, that our Navy and Marine Corps is going to be in great shape over the next 50 years and beyond.
At Prairie View A&M University, we've been igniting passion in students for more than 140 years. It's about inspiration. It's about global influence. It's about self-expression and individuality. It's about trailblazing a path of excellence. It's about engaging in the greater community. Above all, it's about helping you realize your dreams. Ignite your passion. Experience Prairie View A&M University.
The Prairie View A&M Naval ROTC program was established in March of 1968. So at that time, during the Vietnam War, it was compulsory to be involved in a military program. So Dr. A.I. Thomas, the president of the university, was interested in establishing a Naval ROTC unit to complement the Army ROTC unit that was already on campus. Interestingly, at the same time, the Navy was interested in expanding the diversity of the Navy and Marine Corps, and particularly the Officer Corps. And so it was a natural fit, and Prairie View A&M in March of 1968 became the very first Naval ROTC unit established at a historically black college or university here at Prairie View A&M.
Prairie View A&M University has always been somewhat of at the point on the frontiers of change. And the Naval ROTC program was again one of those programs that was implemented to keep us out on the point. They knew that they being Dr. A.I. Thomas and others knew that the Navy was a front runner and it was pretty much an elite operation. And by allowing students from Prairie View to become a part of that would make us world-class leaders. And so the program was designed to take country boys like myself and expose them to a different world, a different set of values and rules.
And the teachers and the nurses that we are so good at educating, and we're really good at it. But today you will see that Prairie View also produces brilliant scholars who help shape the conversations you have in your classroom and who also shape the conversations that you have in your everyday life. African American studies as a tradition pulls together people across disciplines with the common goal of making the profound and the mundane aspects of Black life more visible. We document, we theorize, we write about the everyday aspects of the lives of Black people because we believe that Black lives are interesting and worthy of study. So today we are going to finish up this speaker series with one of our own, somebody who once sat in the audience the way you are sitting today, who is now coming back to share with us about his work and about his vision for Black studies on this campus. So while you sit there, think about what you're learning today and what you will say to us when we invite you back to sit on this stage 10, 20, some years from now. Thank you. Dr. Goodwin is going to introduce Professor Selassie I.
Good afternoon. I had the pleasure of spending some time with Dr. Salassi today. And one thing that struck me more than anything else, I guess, is that he is an alum of this institution, and he's proud of that. You are aware, as students, faculty, and staff, you know how long Prairie View has been here. We talk about it all the time, the 140 years or so. But what does that mean to you? What does being on these grounds mean to you? You know that this was once a operating plantation, Alta Vista Plantation. You know that. But what does that mean to you? And what will that mean to you in 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now? And it's interesting that Dr. Selassie is coming today because he wants to talk about some of his research and, bless you, and what all that means. What does being a Prairie View alum mean? Some of his accomplishments you see in your program. It's impressive, to say the least. And he is proud of the fact that he is from this institution. And he said to a class this morning, I am what I am because of this institution. And that is so powerful to me. Because as you sit here and you walk these grounds, you walk the campus, do you think about what this institution is? How proud of this institution are you? So I want you to think about that as he comes forward, and it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Gabriel Selassie I.
Thank you. I'm going to dispense with the handheld. I think you can probably hear me pretty well without it, right? I think I probably should turn it off or something. And I'm just going to cue up the presentation. At least I thought I was going to cue it up. Maybe I need help in doing that. There we go. Okay, very good. All right, thank you everyone for coming out this afternoon. I'm going to take you through my presentation here, and I think we've got about 25 minutes or so to do that. And I think that I'm going to be able to get it all done. There's a lot really to talk about. And so forgive me if at times I seem like I'm a little bit flippant or brief. But I think there'll be some opportunities for us to ask some questions at the end. So if there's anything that you see and you want some more information about, just feel pretty free to just ask me at the end of the presentation. My title of my presentation is called The Quagmire of Race and the Responsibility of HBCUs. And this title really probably doesn't speak to what my research is about sort of holistically. I kind of threw this together because it sort of in some ways made sense to me. Now, what I'm going to do is try to accomplish just a couple of things. First, I'm going to take you through a small journey how I got to my research, because I think that when we look at it, it'll bear some fruit. There'll be some really interesting things that I think might be applicable to yourselves that you can think about in some greater detail. And also, I think that at the end, there is some value within the research itself. So the first thing I'd like to do is just to show you this photograph. Now, for me, what's remarkable about it is that this is a photograph of my mother. I found this photograph, and it's my mother when she's probably about 20 years or so old. And I took this photograph to her, and I basically said, wow, this is a really nice looking photo. Where'd you've had this for so long, you never showed it to anybody, it wasn't hanging anywhere. Are there any more photographs? And my mother says, well, I really don't have quite a number of photographs of myself or of my relatives. And of course, one of the first things that I asked her is, did she have a photograph of her mother? And she said, no, there's no photograph that I can show you about your people, but I can tell you stories about your family. And one of the things that she told me was a really strange but fascinating story about her mother, Christine, who was a housemaid for a woman named Claudine Maud. And what's remarkable about this is that she worked for this woman most of her sort of teenage through adult years, and when she died, the expectation was that my mother, who was just a teenager when her mother died, would take over. And this woman, Claudine Maud, comes over to my mother's house, and in a sort of, I wouldn't say threatening manner, but the way that my mother expressed it, it made it sound like it, that the expectation is that she would take over the work that her mother did and basically work for the rest of her life as a housemaid to this woman. For me, that struck me rather odd because it wasn't quite slavery, but it was in many ways a form of serfdom. And so for me, I just was absolutely fascinated with this. And how my mother eventually got out of this is that her father worked for the railroad during the Depression and basically put my mother on a train. She went out to California. She got a job working for an actor named James Whitmore. James Whitmore basically told her, you're nothing without an education, so you need to go back to Texas in some way and find a way to get yourself educated. In those days, black students had to go to HBCUs. So there were none in California, so eventually my mother ended up doing that and going on to Bishop College. But I think the important thing about this photograph is that it sparked within me this real large desire to find out much, much more about my family history. So I started doing oral histories. I started talking to people, interviewing them. Being a historian, it's something that I was trained to do. So I basically commenced. Should we wait till they all come in? Okay, I think I'll continue. It's not a problem. So I ventured onto this, and from doing these oral histories, one of the things that came out was the typical stories, and you've probably heard them all. Oh, we're part Indian, we're part Arab, we're part Asian Indian. I heard everything. So the only real way, actually, for me to get at this was to conduct a really in-depth family history, and it eventually led me to this. This is an 1850 United States Census, and it features here a woman by the name of Matilda Mann, and that was my mother's maiden name, Mann. So what happened is essentially is that I found a distant relative by moving backwards from my mother on back to 1850. And this woman, a distant relative, Matilda Mann, actually lived in North Carolina. And for me, that sounded pretty reasonable. I just figured that they were in the South somewhere. She probably had been a slave or maybe even a free person. But the problem is that this is where the trail ended. And so hearing the stories about, well, your people came from so-and-so, they were African kings, all of these sort of wild stories that I heard, I said, well, there's got to be a more reasonable way to get more in depth at this. So I actually went to North Carolina, the Outer Banks area, and talked to local historians who were able to work with me, and we were able to kind of figure out that, yes, there was this woman named Matilda Mann, who was your ancestor, who lived in this area, and after the Civil War, she was interned in a camp, and then from the camp, she moved from North Carolina to Georgia, and then eventually from Georgia to Texas. But one of the interesting things about this is that this is an area where this land was contested by Europeans, Native Americans, and also Africans as well, people of African descent. So everything started at this particular moment to sort of line up. Also, the idea of miscegenation started to kind of factor in here, so I kept thinking to myself, okay, this all pretty much makes sense. So eventually, Matilda Mann moved to this area of East Texas called Tatum, Texas. And if you are familiar with Tatum, Texas, there's probably about 1,000 people who live in that city today. It was started in about the 1840s by a man by the name of Albert Tatum, who founded the city as a plantation. When the Civil War ended, the African slaves who were on that plantation sort of spread out. My family who moved into this area was part of it. They set up house, and this is the place where my mother was actually born. Now, I also conducted a DNA test of myself just to see, this idea of miscegenation and to factor in all of this stuff, and I got the results back. And I know that I know Dr. Simmons has done her DNA, and there's probably several people in here who've done it. What was surprising about this was sort of not this, it said 80% sub-Saharan African with predominance Nigeria, and as you can see, Ghanaian, Congolese, Senegambian, Southern African. That really didn't strike me so much, but this did, the 17.3% European. And of course, if you look here, 5.6% British and Irish, Spanish and Portuguese, French and German. So I kind of figured, I said, well, that's kind of surprising. I expected there to be more African, and I didn't at all think to myself that, well, how much of this is going to be European? But when you kind of think about it, I think most black people in the United States, if you've been here, if your family goes back several generations, you'll find out the same data that I found out as well. And of course, here there's a little bit of Native American as well. So I kind of sat around for weeks looking at this. I laughed a little bit, and I said, well, everybody is mixed with something. And then about 2 weeks later, I received contact or an email saying that there were people whose DNA was also uploaded who I am relatives with, or I would say in some respects cousins. Now, what is striking here is this line here. I sent both of the individuals an email saying, well, hey cousins, it's nice to meet you. And I sort of saw this one, Delaney Mozingo, 1797 in North Carolina. So it kind of all made sense to me. I really didn't think anything until I got the email back, and the person who sent me the email was actually living in Los Angeles, where I lived, and he was a reporter for the New York Times. And what is striking about this is, here is my cousin. Yeah, this is Joe Mozingo. And I kind of thought to myself, I said, well, it's nice to meet you, and it's actually kind of funny that we're actually living in the same city, and Joe had written this book called The Fiddler on the Pantico Roof for this reason. He had always been told that he was Italian, and the name Mozingo was an Italian name. I actually have Italian citizenship, and so I am an Italian citizen. And I just laughed at that. I just thought, wow, that's kind of funny. All the years that I spent in Italy, I've never heard the name Mozingo. And for me, it just sounded like an African name. And I said, well, he goes, you know, I was told that it was Italian, and even though there was evidence all my life that I was actually a black person, I just kind of, everybody in the family ignored it. He tells me this story. He said one day his father opened up a new dental shop, right? He was a dentist, so he opened up a new office, and a woman came in and hadn't seen Joe's father at all. She just saw his shingle on the wall and saw the name Mozingo. She looked at the shingle and looked at the person sitting behind the desk, and she said, wow, I'm not getting my teeth cleaned from a witch doctor. And so the father relayed this story, and I said, but Joe, you realize this person is telling you that you're black. And he said, well, yeah, you know, all my life black people were running up to me and telling me that Mozingo is a African name. And, you know, my wife and other people are saying, yeah, he didn't want to hear it, right? He was kind of in denial. Okay, so I gave kind of Joe a pass at that. What is fascinating about the Mozingos is that they split off. At some particular point in the history, the black Mozingos and the white Mozingos, their histories kind of separated out. So one of the things that Joe ran up against were the white Mozingos, some of them who said, yeah, we kind of knew that we were all black. Some of them didn't want to hear it and slammed the door in his face. And some of them said, we've been living all of our lives as white people. Why should we stop doing that now? Right? So I thought that was kind of interesting. But what it did really is it placed me at a crossroads simply because of the fact I found this all to be so rather interesting. Oh, and just popped into my head. The first Mozingo that came was, in fact, an African warrior, right? So I guess those stories that you heard were all kind of true. But this particular idea sort of put me in a position where I just wanted to know more about DNA. I just wanted to know more about how DNA works, how is it passed down, X chromosomes, Y chromosomes. So I started doing my own research, and it's something that I'm not trained in. I have a degree in architecture and civil engineering, but I never took any real hard sciences here except physics, right? That was the only courses. I didn't take biology here at Prairie View, so I was just basically learning all of this stuff on my own. And one of the things that I ran into was this. Now, I need the guys in the back to sort of cue this up, I think. I don't know if they can hear you. I'm going to show you just about maybe a minute of video. I don't know if they see me. Maybe if I jump up and down and wave my hands, they'll. I think maybe I can do it. Yeah, Safari? Okay. I'm just going to...
by white supremacists. In fact, this year at the annual American Society of Human Genetics...
I'm just going to forward this up just a little bit to the part that I actually want you to see. Okay, there you go.
We love the internet.
Maybe I shouldn't have done that.
The internet is tracking everything you do.
I'm sorry.
With IP vanish on your device,
okay.
your internet activity is encrypted.
I was trying to be brilliant by half. So what you're basically seeing here are young men in their 20s drinking milk. And you're probably asking, well, you could be doing one or two things. You're asking yourself, well, isn't that just rather crazy? Or it's probably making your stomach really queasy, right? For one, in the sense that most black people are lactose intolerant, right? So you're probably seeing that and saying, well, what's the big deal? The big deal here is that this is an alt-right group called the Proud Boys who are on camera demonstrating the fact that they have the ability to process milk. And those individuals who don't have the ability to process milk are therefore non-white and therefore outside of the scope what they would call America or the United States. So this sort of fascinated me, and I just kind of wanted to know much more about this and how is it that we all got to this particular point. I know you're all laughing at me saying that old dude up there with technology. So I kept forward in doing research, and I actually came to the conclusion that this kind of idea about intelligence being inherited is mainstream. Something that I had thought was pushed back decades ago is out in the forefront. This is Jason Richwine, and Jason received his PhD from Harvard in 2009. All right, I'm going to say that again because you didn't hear me. I know you didn't. He received his PhD from Harvard in 2009. His doctoral dissertation was called IQ and Immigration Policy. And basically what he argued is that Latinos are intellectually inferior than white people, and therefore we need to restrict immigration to the United States from south of the border. And that to do this properly is going to cost the United States about $6 trillion. When Richwine was asked about his research and the professors who sat on his chair about some of his ideas, he basically scoffed at them and said, well, everybody knows what I'm talking about is rather true, right? Which, for me, it really shocked me. This document here is all over the internet. This is a document that basically says educatability, genetic scores versus average IQ, and the ranking of races from the highest to the lowest, with Africans at the bottom, with US blacks somewhere just slightly on the same parallel with Caribbeans, but slightly above Nigerians, Kenyans, etc., Peruvians, Bengalis, and all the way up here, right? It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, you name it, it's being passed around and being used by individuals who are claiming that non-white people are intellectually inferior. Now, I had studied at the Claremont Graduate School under Eleazar Barkin, who was an important scholar in genocide and war crimes. And one of the things that we talked about was this idea of the retreat of scientific racism, that scientific racism as a field of study had been thoroughly beat back. These ideas are not acceptable in the mainstream. And I had just come to accept, after reading and talking in class with Dr. Barkin, that yes, scientific racism, in fact, was dead. But when I went to search the statistics, it didn't bear this out. What was borne out was the fact that essentially white people consistently, when asked about black intelligence, consistently rank them lower in forms of intelligence. And this one, White Views on Intelligence of Blacks, General Survey, this is 2012-2016. The same thing here, percent assessing whites more intelligent than blacks, 2012-2016. And you can see some things automatically stand out if you are male and younger. So you can look at the effects of multicultural education. You would think younger people would be less prone to have these beliefs, but not so much. The less educated a person was, they would have a tendency to believe this. Democrats are, strangely enough, more than Republicans. Here, slightly liberal, more so than extremely liberal, but moderates, right, less so. So again, there is enough evidence out here to sort of refute Dr. Barkin's idea that scientific racism had gone with the way of the cassette player, right, in the 1970s and 80s, right? It was something that was dead. And why this is important is for the obvious reasons, is that beliefs about black people then can be carried over into popular culture. And of course, this is relatively new. You guys all know about the thing that happened to Governor Northern, right, in his photographs of blackface. And there's someone over the last couple of days that gathered 900 yearbooks and went through them and discovered that they're all blackface is replete within college campuses all over America. So for me, you look at this and you can look at the statistics. White adults twice as likely as blacks to say blackface for Halloween costume is acceptable, right? And the data sort of bears all of this out. So my questions at this particular point as an academic, where I said, well, this is something that I'm really interested in and I really want to get at the heart of this. So one of the questions that I began to ask is, well, when did scientific racism begin in the first place? I was under the assumption that scientific racism began in the 18th century, and oh my gosh, I was absolutely wrong. It's got a much, much longer history in Europe. With all the multicultural education, why does then racism persist? We've been doing multicultural education since the 1960s, and for what purposes? What are the effects? Has it worked? I'm not quite sure about that. And the other thing that a question that I asked here is that one of the things that I didn't find is I didn't find a lot of scientists trying and working to beat all of this stuff back. There was a really interesting article that I read about a young African-American boy. He was in high school, who his white classmates had argued all semester long that yes, black people were less intelligent than white people, so he wanted to write a paper to refute these ideas. He couldn't find any scientists to help him out. And this is what the scientists have told me, is that we do the science and it's up to you guys to do the work to refute all of this. That's not our job. The science ought to speak for itself, and our science doesn't say that black people are less intelligent. But to me, I just find that somehow to be somewhat terribly wrong, that along the way that there must be some type of responsibility that you must have as a scientist, right, to refute some of these ideas that are coming out. And what the score is that they're taking the science and manipulating it to their own ends, right? This is what I argue, probably one of the, next to the Souls of Black Folk, arguably one of the most important books that you could probably ever read while you're in college. It's St. Clair Drake's Black Folk Here and There. And just by a show of hands, how many people have heard of St. Clair Drake? Just a handful of people heard of Drake. Drake was a University of Chicago anthropologist who one day wanted to ask the question simply, where did racism come from? Right? So he set out a quest to discover the actual origins of racism. And basically what he argued is that racism is a byproduct of the transatlantic slave trade essentially in the 15th century. So what I wanted to do was to try to take Drake's work and mirror my own work to ask the question, when did scientific racism come from? I also discovered what I thought was an equally important work by a historian by the name of William H. O'Neill, who wrote an article called The Care and Repair of Public Myth. And this is what Professor O'Neill said. Once an ideology gets into the popular culture, she says I've got about 5 minutes, that ideology then is almost absolutely, completely hard to destroy. And I think that's the problem with scientific racism. So my work over the last number of years has been to look at this project, what I call the racial project, and I've been working on laboriously this 2-volume monograph that is going to sort of just look at the history of racial science and reappraising Barkin's views and bring in some contemporary work that can sort of look at this holistically and see where we are today, where we've come from and where we are in terms of racial science. And just to get you just a snippet of some of the things that I found. This is a 12th century painting or a mural, and this one is of Joffrey the Elder, who actually wrote an interesting story about the origin of kings in England. He argued this: Stonehenge, right, you're probably all familiar with Stonehenge, was actually built by African gods. And this is one of the earliest instances where we begin to see Europeans beginning to write in some kind of way about Africans. Here is the Hottentot Venus. This was an actual woman who lived named Sarah Bartman, who was brought from Africa to England, and she was put on an exhibit as if she were some type of animal. These are college students who have blackened their faces and adorned themselves to mirror themselves like the Hottentot Venus as a Halloween sort of gesture. This is George Cuvier in the 18th century. When Sarah Bartman died, they took her body to George Cuvier, and he dissected the body, not to find out the causes of her death, but to see if she was actually the missing link. This is Louis Agassiz, who was Swiss-born. I credit him, and this is what I'm writing about, is that he is the person that I believe most guilty, I should say, of foisting the idea that blacks were less intelligent than whites into American culture. He actually believed that black people were created by God in a separate creation. He was a polygenist. This person is Josiah Nott. And I've written something down about Josiah Nott that I just kind of wanted to remember. And let me go through my notes and grab it for you really quickly. Josiah Nott was one of the most important people in also bringing out these ideas of racial science. Here is his understudy, Samuel Morton, who also was measuring the sizes of African Americans' heads to see if they were in fact the same size as whites. Right, here is another understudy. This individual, and it just escapes me off the top of my head who he is, but that individual was doing the same thing, the measurement of black bodies. But all in all, this research matters, and it matters because that in a day and age in the 20th century, the 21st century, we still have the idea that black people are in fact less intelligent than other people. And for Prairie View, this study here really exemplifies it. Mary Murphy, who is a professor at the University of Indiana, did a study of 150 professors throughout the United States, engineering professors. And what she found out is that today, in 2019, there are actually engineering professors who actually believe that African Americans are less intelligent than whites. And why that's important is that blacks in those campuses where whites believe that get lower grades than white students. So all in all, why this is important for us is that we really need to grapple with our history. And so I think we're just basically out of time here, but this for me, I think we need to take from Marcus Garvey the idea that a people without the knowledge of their past, history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Thank you. Should we?
So what we're going to do first is have is this on? Yes. You can move over to your seat. Is have a short discussion, and then if we have time, we'll take questions. I don't know who said that. I just heard it coming from. Yeah. Yes. So we're going to have a discussion first, and then we'll see if given how much time we have. First of all, thank you so much for all of that. I think the thing that I want to start this way, that's not necessarily related to your research, but I think might be good for the students to hear, which is, I would like you to tell me about a class you took here that was like the most impactful class you took here, and why.
Oh, that's a hard one. Back in those days, are there any architecture majors here in the room? Right, back in those days, we had to take a lot of classes in architecture. I think I graduated with about 220 credits. And I think, yeah, and these days, I think to get an architecture degree, it's about 130.
Wow.
So that's a really hard one. I think not.
Did you have to pay for those credits individually, like
Yeah,
by the hour?
you actually
Okay,
did.
wow.
What I think, though, for me is not so much the class per se, but I think there were 3 professors in architecture that really influenced me, and one of them I've written about in a book about HBCUs named Ben McMillan. He was an individual that really impressed upon me the idea of professionalism. Not just in terms of turning your work in on time and that sort of thing, that's just rather obvious, but the idea about how one comports themselves, how they carry themselves, what is their overall attitude to things like work, and that was probably more impressive to me than, say, any particular class at all.
Thank you. Because I think it's helpful for students to think about the classes that they're sitting in now and the way it's sort of preparing them for what's to come.
Yeah, I as a student, I probably, if I'm honest about it, I probably was about a C+ student. I had made some decisions when I was here at Prairie View to really be engaged socially. So I pledged a fraternity, went to all the parties.
I've
right?
never heard anybody call it a decision to be engaged
Oh
socially.
yeah, it was, well, you have a choice, right? You can either go to the party or you can stay and study just a little bit more. And
Yeah.
for some classes I said, okay, I'll get a C in that one. I'll get a C in that one. That one I need to get an A in, so I'll really study for that one. And part of it is that I wanted to have the full college experience for me. So I don't know about you guys, but I just wanted to do everything at Prairie View. So, but with that being said, when I look back on it, that was a mistake, right? So if you're engaged in that or you're thinking about doing that.
Don't party.
And what I mean by that is that there were classes that I had at Prairie View where when I was working, I heard stuff and I said, man, I had that in a class. And I just had to kind of remember, boy, I should have studied that a little bit more, right? So it may not seem like it today, right? Because you're in the class and you've got so many other things that are going around in your life, but really every class does matter, right? I mean, that's just the simplest way to put it. It may not seem like it, but eventually you're gonna be where I'm sitting and you're gonna tell people the same thing, and then people are gonna be looking at you thinking the same thing you're thinking about me now. But it does matter.
What do you think, because your talk is really about HBCUs and their importance in the study of race. Have you thought at all about what Prairie View has to offer as a particular black college in terms of what kinds of resources, information, experiences that we can bring to bear in African American studies?
Well, Dr. Murphy's study on STEM students I think is really valuable and important because who you get taught by matters. We may have a tendency to think about that really your professor in some way really doesn't matter, but if you think about the people that you were taught all the way up to you getting here to Prairie View, you can probably think of just one real teacher that was really important out of about 12, 13, 14, or 15, right? One who probably really said something to you to get you on the path. The problem with that is it's usually just one. And that what we all probably needed in our lives are many professors. For me, when I got to Prairie View, I was extremely lucky. There were 3 professors here, probably 4 professors here, Simon Wiltz, Ben McMillan, Don Curl, Wesley Henderson, even Marshall Brown, that really, they had, even though I fought them a lot about the things that I was doing, right? I mean, they really taught me and showed me. One of the things that they would do to me all the time that I really got annoyed at and later on I really prized, especially Don Curl, he would walk up to me and say, you should start your own architecture firm. Okay, well, yeah, I plan to do that, man. But he kept saying it over and over again. So when I graduated, I opened up a bank account, and every month I put in $75. Next thing you know, I had 100 grand. Next thing I did, I walked into my boss's office and said, I'm out of here. And my boss said, man, it's cold out there. It's cold out there. Be careful. It's cold out there. And I said, man, I got 100 grand. What I did with that 100 grand, I got a cheap office that had rats in it. Oh, yeah. They used to eat up all the fruit and food that I used to leave in. Yeah. And you know what? I walked into an interview for a project for the city of Arcadia. I had a set of business cards in my pocket, and I sat there and I convinced those people to give me the project. By the time I got done talking to them, they thought that I had a full-blown office with a whole bunch of employees. I had no employees. They sent me the contract. The contract sat on my table for weeks. I was too afraid to sign it. And then one day I just walked in and said, you know what, I'm going to do it, and if I fail, I fail. If I succeed, I succeed. I signed it, put it in, put an ad in the newspaper and said, architects wanted. Hired my first architect on site. She came in, she said, oh, I can do it. I gave her a little test to do. She did, I said, you're hired. Got a contract, city of Arcadia, got a contract with a bunch of other cities in the local area, and then all of a sudden the contract started multiplying. I ended up being asked to go to Morocco. I went to Morocco and was speaking at a conference, couldn't get a taxi cab. Some woman who was at the conference saw me. She said, you're not going to ever get a taxi cab, dude, because you just look American. I jumped in the car. She gave me a ride. That ended up becoming my business partner. I ended up from there doing work from South Africa to Europe. I got projects in China. I was everywhere, man. So you can see just from being the person who sat right in that seat to starting a little bank account that ended up turning into a full-blown office. I mean, I had 15 employees.
So then after all that, why go to graduate school? Why become a professor?
My specialty was cultural patrimony, right? Historic preservation. And so it just kind of, at some particular point, somebody asked me to teach a class. I taught a class. I liked it. They kept asking me to teach more classes, and then somebody asked me if I wanted to teach full-time. I said, well, I've kind of semi-retired. I'm actually kind of playing video games all day. I wasn't actually doing much of anything. And it just, one thing led to another, and I ended up teaching full-time. Right? I mean, there's nothing more mysterious.
One thing led to another, but there were lots of years in study and all these things.
Oh, yeah, it was hard
in between.
Work.
Okay, so let's talk about your presentation a little bit, and I'm interested how you started with the photograph of your mother and the way that you talk about how, you know, many of us don't have photographs going back.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't know what our grandparents or great-grandparents look like, but we have stories. Tell our students what you think they should be doing right now in terms of their own family genealogy.
Yeah, it's really a sad kind of thing. Like, I just was talking to my cousin today. There's a photograph of my great-grandmother that I used to see as a kid, and I saw that photograph hanging on the wall, and I always wanted to know what happened to it, and they can't find it. And so it's lost in the ether. And really why that's a shame is because of all of the wonderful stories like mine with Mozingo, these are part of the American landscape. You are Americans, and your history matters. Black lives matter. Black history matters as well. And most of us walk around, and we can only probably go back maybe 1, 2 generations of people. But think of the kind of sacrifices that your ancestors made who were enslaved or not enslaved. Maybe they were free black people, right? I think for me as a historian, I appreciate where my ancestors came from. My mother went to Bishop College, right? I don't know if you guys have heard of Bishop College, but it closed down several years ago. My mother wanted to come here to Prairie View because back in those days, if you didn't go to Prairie View, it wasn't happening for you, right? Prairie View was the place to be, but she couldn't afford it. So why that it's important, my mother told me when I was in high school, you should go to Prairie View because those people will teach you about your history, something that I can't do. Right, so I think, first of all, knowing who you are, as Marcus Garvey once said, that you have to know your roots, where you've come from. in America, when it rains, man, it rains on everybody's house.
So one of the things
Right.
that's important, one of the things that you're saying is important, is that people start to collect the stories, even the stories in our own families that we've heard over and over again.
The
Can you
Egyptians,
tell them 3 concrete things they should be doing now to preserve their family history?
first thing that I would do is I would interview people and talk to them what they know about your families.
Record the
Yeah,
interviews.
just do the oral history. And if you just put a tape recorder in front of them.
No,
and
no tape
well-
recorder.
well-
A digital.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I used to, back in the day, I would do oral interviews, and I would spend an hour with important people like John Lewis, and then I'd walk out of the interview. 2 days later, I'd play it, and there was nothing on it because I forgot to press the button, right? That kind of thing, right? So if you're going to do the oral interviews, you should do them digitally. I usually use 2 or 3 devices, but that's what I would say, do the oral. The other thing that I would do is I would start collecting all the photographs and start digitizing them immediately. Right? Because we used to have a family Bible with our complete family lineage in it, and it burned up. Right? So those kinds of things happen. People move, things get lost.
So take pictures of the pictures.
Yeah,
That's what he's saying.
that's what I would do. The other thing is that some people are kind of against this, but I'm not, right? So, being a STEM major, right, I believe in the science. To me, just doing the DNA, I think we were talking earlier that there's some problems with that. But I don't have a problem with it, right? I just seemingly don't. But that's also another way to go, because you might find some very interesting things about your family that might lead you down some very interesting roads like the one that I was led down. I mean, our family reunions now are quite interesting.
This is
Right.
interesting because DNA is where I was going next, right? We talk in America about race as if it's such fixed categories, but what these DNA tests are doing, well, first of it's confirming to most of us that we don't have Indian in our family.
Yeah.
Like, so whoever is being told that, you can just drop it.
Yeah, I hear
no
that
matter
all
what
the
your
time.
cheekbones look like, it turns out very few of us actually have Indian in our family.
Yeah, everybody says that I'm part
But
Indian.
what's also interesting is it's showing us how you can be what we characterize today as African American, and those DNA tests can say you're 55% European.
Yeah.
How does that change our understanding of what does that mean for race for us?
Well, for me, I sent Ireland a letter and actually asking them for Irish citizenship, right? And I sent them a copy of this, and I laughed. They haven't responded back, right? Because I think they looked at it and laughed at it too and threw it in the trash can, that sort
They
of thing.
probably thought you were like Idi Amin, the last king of Scotland. They were like, no, we will not be.
Yeah, but I think what it will do is I think if you're young, it'll open up some vistas for you. I mean, I don't see why in this day and age why you can't do things like if you find out that you're a part something that you never knew about, why you can't make an exploration into that, right? I think that we live in such a fluid and dynamic world that it doesn't, behoove anybody to stay in their small little circle, right? For me, I've kind of always thought about that somewhere along the west coast of Africa, and I spent such a great deal of time in Africa, and every African country I went to, everybody said, you look Igbo, right? That kind of thing. Every village that I went to, people would say, yeah, you look like one of us. But now you can literally find exactly where your people come from, right? And go there and see what it's like. I think that that's sort of the beauty of it all, right? And I think for me, it kind of reminds us, right, that we are a multicultural people, right? And I think that's really the strength of Black America, is that we do have so much influence from without, right?
Sure. The last question I have, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wilson, is about this discussion of scientific racism, right? And the ways in which the study of race is so intertwined in the academy. You talked about the persistence of scientific racism. What do you think are some things we could do to sort of, you said there should be more people combating it. What are some of the things that people should be doing to combat scientific racism?
Well, I think as a Prairie View student, or even professors here at Prairie View, is that you need to arm yourself with facts. The Proud Boys, I talk to them all the time, either on Twitter or something. Sometimes they send me really nasty, derogatory emails, right? They're under assault from the FBI right now, so they're just trying to destroy that organization. But having to engage with them, these young men, They seem like they're a bunch of silly nincompoops. These people are armed with information. They will fight you tooth and nail. And I have to be very diligent about the things that I say to them, because they will pick everything apart and send me links to data. So with that being said is that what I would hope would be done here at Prairie View is producing an army of teachers and engineers and lawyers and political scientists, people who can move into the American landscape and not be fooled by the complexity of this, all of this. It seems when you start looking at the numbers, all of it is just mind-numbing because you have to deal with numbers. But you know what? You have to fight fire with fire. Educate yourself so that when you go into an office and you're asking to be project manager or take on a case or something, that you have the confidence within yourself to know that you're just as bright or capable as anybody else to do the work. Because people will automatically, I'm telling you, I'll just give you one quick example. I went for a project, my firm, didn't get the project. I walked out, I got a call from a secretary. Secretary said, now, if you tell anybody this, I'm gonna get fired. That you didn't get the project because you're black. I just wanted to tell you that. Oh, so you know what's gonna happen to you is that people will automatically think that you are lesser because of the color of your skin, and you need to arm yourself and be prepared for it.
I think that's a wonderful place to end, and we're going to turn over to Dr. Wilson for some closing remarks. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. We are going to take questions next. I forgot. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. We'll take 2 or 3 brief questions if anybody has some. I know somebody had one because. Okay, anybody else wants to ask a question? I'm sorry, I didn't think about it. Yes. Questions?
Winning lottery numbers?
Oh, do you have those?
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
Now, you were in Morocco, so you know about the Moors and all.
Oh, yes.
You didn't talk very much about the Moors and the way they dominated Europe. And that could have had something to do with the racism being dominant.
Well, it's really interesting that you mentioned this. I had a conversation with someone from Europe, and they asked me about the Moors. And one of the questions that they asked me was that how come you go to Spain, and Spain, even though they were the Moors, you guys know about the Moors in Morocco, how they moved in 711 into the Iberian Peninsula, and they conquered for 500 years. Why isn't the Spanish population more black looking than it is? And I simply tell them is because the ones who didn't leave, the Moors that weren't pushed out and didn't leave, those ones that stayed were all murdered. They were all killed, right? So part of the difficulty for me in terms of doing the research is that there isn't much left. The Moorish civilization, for the most part, right? There's still some remnants like the Alhambra and those things are still there, but for the most part, Moorish civilization was completely wiped out.
Yeah, except for the architecture.
Yeah, the architecture remains, right? So it's something that I actually haven't really gotten to look at. This research is all quite new to me as well. The ship.
The big shipping industry, they built ships larger than our aircraft carriers.
Or you're talking about?
What ships did Columbus use?
I'm not sure the
Spain only became a country in 1492.
Yes, that's right.
Whose ships did they
Well, yeah, and also, yeah.
sell it over here all along?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a small part of the larger picture, I think, but I haven't really done a whole lot of research in the scientific racism coming out of Spain. Most of the scientific research that was generated was coming out of France, quite honest with you, right? That's where it originates from.
Somebody else, do you have another question? Yes.
I'd like to hear him comment about something about the study of language in combating this racism, scientific racism, because I think that's very important in terms
Yeah, well, it's here are just the real problem that I see from myself doing this isn't something that I was educated in per se. This was my dissertation topic was on local history in Los Angeles in the 20th century. So one of the difficulties is that a lot of the primary research is in French, right? So I labor and struggle to read. There are English translations, but you have to really get into the languages themselves, right? Because sometimes words don't quite translate well from the particular host language to the English language. So for me, when I was here at Prairie View, I didn't, there maybe have been 1 or 2 Spanish majors here at Prairie View that I ever met, but most people didn't take language classes here, and that for me was a huge mistake. Looking back at it, I wish that I would have taken French, because if you go to Africa, French is spoken so widely on the continent that it helps to open up the culture to you, right? I mean, knowing the language is really somewhat of a powerful thing. I speak fairly decent, at times, Italian, so I'm able to access the culture, and I just wish that I would have taken more time to do things like learn French and other languages. It's just, having that as part of your sort of resume is an absolutely powerful tool for you. Yes.
My question is, I was reading through, because I know you and respect you and so proud of you. You're a master's in theology.
Yes.
I kind of figured, wanted to know, how does the study of theology really influence your research or your work?
I realize you can't understand black people unless you understand religion and the impact of the black church on the black community. So I thought to myself, I'm just gonna go take a class. I took a class. I took another class. And then I took another class. And the next thing you know, I had 36 units and I applied for a master's degree. But it's been indispensable, because a lot of the work that I've been doing, this sort of had budded, this work here sort of sidetracked my book on the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey, and George Alexander McGuire, who was the general chaplain of that organization. And so the theology work that I did, I worked with a guy at Notre Dame named Hugh Page, who is an Episcopalian priest and one of the most eminent scholars in blacks in the Episcopalian faith. And it helped me to kind of understand what black people were facing and how they use the theology to sort of build a foundation here in America, right? The black church means everything to black America. So it may sound quite strange. I have 6 master's degrees, right? And people look at that and they kind of, sometimes they laugh and sometimes they think they get impressed. And part of it is just I like knowing things. I want to know something, so I take classes and I just keep taking them. That's all that is.
So we have one question from our students. Like, if you're sitting in a place now where he once sat, is there a question you want to ask him about this campus, about what he thought about his future, and how he made those things come true? Is there anything that you guys want to ask him as a person who sort of walked the path that you've walked already? Anything? Yes.
Yes.
Quickly. Then if you go quickly, both of you can ask. Yes. Jeez. All right, you go first, Mr. Gray Shirt, and then you go next, Mr. Blue Shirt. Yes. He had to look down to see what color his shirt was.
It's not necessarily about career path or anything like that, but I am interested. You said that there's been scientific theories, and people like to use theories against black folk and saying that you're not as smart as a white person or whoever. But can you give me just like the #1 reason why they may think this? Because a lot of times I can tell when someone thinks I'm not necessarily as smart as them, but I'm looking at them like, yo, you're not as smart as you think you are.
Yeah, that's a complicated question, and it's complicated in the sense of this reason. When Europeans started expanding out across the globe, they ran into people that they, in their lives, couldn't have dreamed ever existed. So they would look at a person like yourself and they would say, my gosh, why is your hair like that? Why is your skin darker? And if you went to Europe, if you would have gotten on a ship with them and went to Europe, they would have looked at you and said, my gosh, you've been here 6 months and you haven't gotten any lighter. So you can't be one of us. So therefore, since you can't be one of us, probably then God created black people, and then God created white people. And then some would have gone to Africa and said, Africa is not like Europe. It's backwards. They're savages. It's less civilized. So since it's less civilized, they can't be on the same level that we are. Some of it, like Louis Agassiz, were just out and out, flat out racist. They just hated black people, and they said it all the time. Louis Agassiz went to a restaurant one time, and a black person served him, and he nearly had a heart attack. He said, the guy touched me. We actually have a letter from this man in the 19th century. He wrote home to his mother saying he was touched by an African-American waiter, and it made his skin crawl. So the answer to your question is it's quite difficult in the sense that some of them were just out and out racist. Some of them just really, truly said, we can't explain the differences in people. So therefore, there's got to be a reason. And one of the reasons might be that black people were just created separately from white people, and our civilization is better than yours, so we must be more intelligent.
Okay, neighbor. Yes, Mr. Blue Shirt.
My question, actually, I would like to ask kind of somewhat of a follow-up to what you just mentioned. And not just my studies, but in my work life, I kind of feel that being underestimated for me is an advantage. So when we are viewed as possibly inferior or less knowledgeable, would that be a better approach for us to take that as the advantage of them seeing?
Yes. I mean, no, not yes to your answer. Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't see any value in that whatsoever. And one of the things that I had really strove to do when I was working was respect, right? That to me is a really, because people, especially if you happen to be a black woman, and I'm quite sure black females have heard this a lot, people will go out of their way to disrespect you. I'm just gonna tell it like it is. They will do that. They will test you. You will have people, your colleagues will say things to you that just will make your jaws drop. So from my perspective, having been out in the working world, both as an employee and an employer, I can't see any advantage in that, right? I wanted people to respect the work that I did, so I worked 24 hours a day. I worked really super hard. Right? People would do things like, they would say to me, what college did you go to? And I would say, I went to Prairie View A&M University. And they would say, what? Where is that? And they would just automatically dismiss it. Until about maybe a few months when the promotions came around, I get promoted and they'd say Prairie View. They would go on the internet because you could see them looking up Prairie View to see where it is, right? And because they would say, if you didn't go to Harvard, Notre Dame, wherever, Berkeley, UCLA, it must be a university not worth anything, because why would you go there, right? So for me, right, I don't see any advantage of that, right? I walk in, right, with a certain disposition, and, I get told all the time that, you're really tall, you speak really well, and people are intimidated by you. And I say, good.
I know you're supposed to answer this question, but the thing that I will say is if you get hired to do a job and the people there underestimate you, you've now been hired to do two jobs.
Yeah.
Convince them that they've underestimated you and actually do the job. Whereas everybody else who they didn't underestimate, all they have to do is one job, which is the job. And don't ever take two jobs unless you're getting two salaries. And if no one is paying you to be underestimated, then underestimation is not an actual. Do you see what I'm saying? And so it's nice when people didn't think you could do something, to see their face and their jaws drop, that's a cool feeling. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
I've enjoyed it, but it's not a position that you actually want to court as a permanent, like, kind of life. You don't want it regularly. But if you do it, I mean, if you see a racist and then you have to show that racist how you're better than them, it feels good. But that's not how you want to live your life. That's just a thing that might have to happen.
I'm just going to tell you a really quick story. Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I know we're stretched for time, but I know you guys want to get out of here, but this is a really interesting one. I took reinforced concrete design here from Marshall Brown, and one of the things in the class, it's all theoretical, just math stuff. And we were in the class and we said, you know what would be really cool is if we actually went and played with concrete, because what's the point of taking a reinforced concrete design class if you can't actually learn how to make concrete? So Mr. Brown said, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So for a couple of weeks, we just played around with concrete. So I learned a little bit about concrete in that class. Years later, I was in the office and I got called in, but when I was standing outside to be called into the principal's office, there was a guy on the phone just screaming. And I didn't know what the conversation was, and the person said, hold on a minute, put their hand over the phone and said, come here. And I walked in the office and he said, if you were gonna design a structure at the beach, what would you design it as? And I thought about it for a minute. I said, that's easy. I would just build it out of concrete. And the guy said, okay. He talked on the phone for a minute. And he said, I'll be with you in just a minute. So I walked back out. There was a guy standing there. He had a degree from Harvard. I'll never forget this. The door closed, and I could hear screaming in the background. He brought me in. They kicked the guy out. I walk in, and I said, what's the deal? And he said, that idiot designed that building out of aluminum. And I thought,
it rusted, all of it.
Yeah, and I thought to myself, I said, wow, you know, when I was at Prairie View A&M University, I learned that if you're gonna do something like that, you design it out of concrete, right? But my point that I'm making here is that most of the people that I was in the office with had never heard of Prairie View. We had wanted to come to recruit students from Prairie View. They didn't want to do it because they said that, what's Prairie View? We can get all of our students from Berkeley and UCLA. Why would we want to go there? You know what they did, followed up with? We went recruiting at Prairie View. And there's still people at Prairie View working in that office. So the idea of underestimation, people are going to automatically do that to you anyways.
Yeah.
So I don't see why you would want to put yourself in that position at all.
I'm going to jump in here.
Okay.
Otherwise, we won't end this. But I do want you to, if you didn't have the opportunity to ask a question, please come up in a few minutes afterwards and ask your question, because I think there is a continued dialogue that's there. In thinking about what I would say, I thought of one word that would probably capture some of what we're trying to do, and that is resilience. Building on the past, remembering and deconstructing the struggle, celebrating the legacies of our history and culture, and then striving to create the foundation for our future. This evening, we have enjoyed hearing the scholarly research of Dr. W. Gabriel Selassie I, and this dialogue represents a range and richness of African American studies. The Scholars Voices series offers an opportunity for us to come together on the campus of Prairie View A&M University to learn from scholars and experts about the history and culture of African Americans. As a colonial historian of African history, I often encourage my students in various audiences to think about this long history of Africa's contributions to the New World. So I want you to think 1619, the first 20 enslaved Africans were brought from Africa to Jamestown, Virginia. Eventually more than 12.7 million people from Africa were captured and sold as property in the slave trade industry and brought to the New World. It is now 2019, and we are celebrating 400 years of African people living, proclaiming, and producing their lives in America. Indeed, this is more than resilience. It is a uniquely remarkable human narrative. Dr. Selassie I believes, quote, nothing will resolve the tension that exists both within and outside of Black America without new objectives and new directions, end of quote. Clearly, this vision is rooted in the historic traditions of the African American experience, that a better day is coming, that each day continues our cycle of representation, creative presence, political and economic contributions, and the collective testament that God is good, always. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once commented on the history and the resilience of African American life. He said, quote, before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the pen of Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the opposition we face will surely fail. Today, in the current climate in which we live, where the cost and benefits of higher education are under intense criticism and scrutiny, we assert that the specific strengthening of the PVAMU students' historical and cultural education is an essential part of a liberal education in the 21st century. The vision to infuse the study of African American history and culture into the core curriculum at PVAMU is the brainchild of President Ruth J. Simmons, a scholar and visionary who believes that knowledge is power, and to know and value your own history is transformative. In closing, I want you all to consider an interesting history exercise. I myself encouraged some friends to join me in celebrating this exercise over 30 years ago. And some of my friends are still continuing to organize this historic exercise, particularly during the month of February to celebrate Black History Month. I want you to consider inviting 20 good friends and colleagues to come together to honor and acknowledge the first 20 enslaved Africans in 1619. And I want you to have each person bring a symbolic item of food, like neck bone soup or cornbread or collard greens or chicken, something that was sustainable and symbolic of the food that we brought. For all 20 of you, you bring this. So we did this, and then we all shared something specific about our experiences in the United States, something historic about our past. Eventually, a couple of years ago, we decided to collect a certain amount of money to donate to various causes to help those in need. One year, we all gave $100. So 100 times 20 is $2,000. $2,000 we gave to a charity to make sure that some young kids would be able to celebrate African American history by giving them books. A couple of years ago, we decided to give $500 each. And we would all take that money and travel to West Africa to visit slave castles for 2 weeks. So do the math. $500 times 20 is $10,000. This is what I want you to collectively remember, that the resources that we put together to honor our history and culture is something that's significant, that we can do that if we put our minds to it. I want to thank Dr. Salassi for returning to the Hill to share your knowledge. Likewise, I'd like to thank Dr. Price for returning to the Hill as our new endowed professor of political science. This concludes this program. Thank you.